Robinson. I am a solutions consultant with Beyond 20, and today we'll be reviewing how to connect to Cherwell's SOAP API using either PowerShell or a .NET application within Visual Studio. Now, as I'm going through this video, I'm going to be referencing a CSM Web Services and API document. The current version of this document is release 5.0, and it was released on 27 October 2014. If you would like to get this document or you don't have it, you can reach out to Cherwell support and they will gladly email you a copy. Now, this document is going to lay out a lot of the structure of the Cherwell Web Services API. Now, this is separate from the REST API that came out in version 8.0. This is strictly going to be for the SOAP API. And in this document, we have an overview of how this API functions, how we can access it. Right here, we can see that the default URL for accessing the web service API is going to be the localhost or your server name /cherwellservice/api.asmx. And this URL that we can see here is actually going to be the URL that we'll use later when we're referencing this API or when we look for a WSDL for the API. And then the overview also covers a few other items, such as how different functions in this API work, so you can actually drill into each of the items that show up on that web service declaration page when you click on that link. And you can read through that and see each of these items in detail. So what we're going to cover in this video is really going to be how we can log in to the Cherwell Web Service API. We can do this either through PowerShell, or we also have a nice example of how to do this in C#. But in my video example here, I'm going to be doing it in PowerShell or Visual Basic, just because I have a bit more experience with Visual Basic than I do C#. So first, I'm going to take our PowerShell example. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this. And on our login section here, some things that are noted are that the usernames and passwords that we have in this example are going to be for a starter or demo database. You'll obviously need to sub out the CSD admin sections here for your actual username and password. The web service URL, and that's the one that's included right here or here, is going to be referencing your install of Cherwell, so swap out localhost with whatever your service URL is, and then finally the result of the method is going to return whether or not you were able to log in. So you'll get a logical value of true or false. If you have logged in, you'll get a true. If you weren't able to successfully log in, you'll get a false. You won't get any reason for why you haven't been able to log in. So if you were able to reach the server and you were able to try to authenticate and it didn't work, you'll just get a false. But if you were able to log in, you'll get a true. Now let's break down the structure of these commands before we get into them. So first, in the PowerShell example, we're going to set a variable called URI to our web service URL. That's fairly simple. And then we're going to declare a new Cherwell service variable as a new instance of a web service proxy. And then we pass it a URI parameter of the web service URI that we declared here. Next, we are going to set a property of our Cherwell service that we've instantiated. The property is going to be a cookie container. This is going to store the session or any cookies or session information related to signing into Cherwell. And really, this is important for storing our state that we're logged in. So if you log in using this command here and you haven't declared or instantiated this cookie container for your Cherwell service, you'll be able to log in successfully, but then none of your other commands afterwards will run because you haven't given your Cherwell service a cookie container to store its current state. And then finally, we just run the Cherwell services login method and pass it a username and password. This is a fairly simple command for Cherwell and its web service API. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this out, and we'll see how this works in PowerShell. So I'm opening up ISE, or our PowerShell integrated scripting editor. I'm going to go ahead and paste in the information that we had from the web service URL document. Looks like I actually have a bit of a formatting issue here, so give me one moment while I paste these out to separate lines. Alright, so here, just like we saw in the example, we have we have our URI getting declared, we have our Cherwell service getting declared as a new web service proxy, and then we get a cookie container and we log in. Now I have a demo database installed on my local machine, so this should be everything that I need to do to log into Cherwell. So I'm going to go ahead and press F5 to run this script. And we can see the contents of this script have run, and I've received a true that indicates that I've logged in. This is all you need to do to log into the system from within PowerShell using this API. After this point, I'm going to go ahead and start using the PowerShell console, but after this point, either through the console or through your PowerShell script, you can start accessing other commands through the API, such as I'm going to type in Cherwell service so we can see what we have available to us. And we'll do a period, and then here we can start doing any of the other commands that we have on our Cherwell service API. So if I wanted to do a Cherwell query, I could then start executing those queries right from my console or straight from the ISE or from the scripts by adding additional commands after this point in the script. So that's a fairly simple thing to set up. Next, I'm going to cover how we can do this within Visual Studio. I'm going to go ahead and resize Visual Studio so it fits in my view here. So within Visual Studio, I'm going to start a new project, and I'm going to make this new project a console application. I'm going to go ahead and leave it with the default console application 1 name because I don't have very much to do with this console. It's just going to be an example. Now in our Visual Studio project, we have our main method here, or our main subroutine. And this is what's going to be executed when we run this console application. Now, according to our Cherwell Web Service API documentation, we have to create a web service to Cherwell Web Services. We have to set the URI to our server URL and Cherwell service /api.asmx. I'm going to go ahead and copy out this link, or it may be better for me to do so from within PowerShell since I have that open. And within Visual Studio, I'm going to go to my project, and we can see that project here, and I'm going to add a service reference. Now you'll notice I added a service reference, and our documentation asks us to create a web reference. So if you didn't have that option to create a web reference when you right-clicked on that, or that option was disabled, once you get into the Add Service Reference screen, we're not going to be typing in that address right here. We're actually going to go to the Advanced page, and we're going to select Add Web Reference. Once you get to this screen, you can type in your server URL. For me, I'm actually opening Visual Studio on a separate machine than the one that I was showing you with the PowerShell example, so I'm going to have to address that one by IP address. And Cherwell service/API.asmx. I'll click Go To, and we can see our Cherwell service or Cherwell web service API will appear. We'll give this web reference a name, and then click Add Reference. This adds our Cherwell SOAP API to our project as a web reference for Cherwell service, and then we simply need to use that Cherwell service when we are working with our application. So in our example, we have in C# a public Boolean method of login, and here we're going to instantiate Cherwell by declaring a new Cherwell service variable with a value of as a new instance of the Cherwell API. Now at this point, if you get an error in Visual Studio saying that Cherwell.api is not a valid type, you may have added the web reference as a service reference instead of a web reference, so be sure to go back and add that as a web reference to the advanced page if you're using a newer version of Visual Studio that immediately goes to the service reference page. So I'm going to go ahead and build this out now. So here I'm going to declare a new variable. I have lost focus. And then our next step is going to be to give our Cherwell instance a cookie container. By the way, you'll notice I had to go back and give it a .api, because our Cherwell service is our web service reference. Then API in the end of it is the actual API that's available under that web service reference. Next, I'm going to give Cherwell a cookie container. And then finally, we can execute our Cherwell login method. Here we're going to pass in our credentials. And this is all we'll need to do to log in through a Visual Studio application that we're developing. And here in my example, I'm doing this in visualbasic.net, but you could do so in C# as well. And right now, I've just executed this command or this function for Cherwell.login. Really, if I want to see the progress of this, I'm going to have to get it onto our console application screen. To do so, I'm just going to execute a console.writeLine. Pass it a string of whatever we get returned from this function. And then to make our console wait, I'm going to execute a console.readLine. Now I can start my application. So here we'll see Visual Studio build out our console application. And then over on my other screen, we can see it executes through the Cherwell service instance, and then it runs the login command and passes it to a console.writeLine, and we see the word true. This means that we were able to log into the Cherwell system. That's all we need to do to log into Cherwell from the SOAP API within a .NET application. Since I executed a console.readLine, as soon as I press enter, our application is going to end. Obviously, if you were going to use this for something else, you would be passing in the credentials from some other location. Ideally, you would not have them hard-coded into your application like this, because that would not be secure. So that is everything we need to do to execute the login to Cherwell method through the web service API. If you'd like to see other videos like this one, feel free to check out our YouTube channel at youtube.com/beyond20llc. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to post them in the comments section below.